The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Tallheimer and Chuck Simikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Tallheimer and Chuck Simikian.
This is the HR Stories podcast where there's a lesson in every story. I am Chuck, the Chuckster, Simikian, SPHR, SHRM, SCP, all those great letters. And with me is John. I don't have a nickname for you off the top. John Tallheimer, MS, MSNBC, CNN, FOX. No, I don't know. No, John's got his master's degree. He's the coaching guru, John, and you want to go to johntallheimer.com. The links are in the bio below to find out all about him. But hey, this is the HR Stories podcast where we talk, we laugh, we have fun, we talk about HR, we tell stories, and we talk about what's happening in the news. We gossip about HR stuff. I am a HR director at a large resort in Florida, and John is an HR consultant and training guru. So with that being said, what do you got, John?
Wow, that's a lot. You dropped a lot there on me. That's a lot of responsibility, folks.
Unscripted.
We're excited to be here today. This is a special episode. Our story is going to be a little bit different. But before we get to that, let's talk about what's happening in the HR news world. And I was actually, speaking of HR news, I was on HR Morning. I don't know if you get to that information, Chuck, but the HR Morning is a website membership site that you guys can all join. Definitely check it out there. And I was reading one of their articles about fragrancy sensitivities and the ADA.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so individuals in our lives may have sensitivity to certain fragrancies and at certain levels. And this may cause an issue that may fall under the Americans with Disability Act. And so in this article, it's very interesting. In the article, they were talking about things. And it reminded me, I was teaching this class. I was doing a workshop for HR directors. And one of the people there said that they had an employee who had high levels of fragrance sensitivity to the such that she couldn't be around any fragrances at all. No flowers, no perfume, none of those wall fresheners and that kind of stuff. And so we talked about, like, how did you deal with it? What was the ways you dealt with it? And they were very lucky because everyone in that office area was like, that's fine. We don't need to wear perfume. We don't need to have flowers. We'll be fine. And so in their kind of closed off office, that was the rule, right? No perfume, nothing like that in that office. However, when this person had to go out to other people's offices, it could have been a little debilitating. And so they had to kind of measure that and look at that and kind of do that. And so you kind of have to really think through that process to be like, all right, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle it? Does it rise to that level where it falls under ADA? And remember, ADA says somebody with a disability has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one of their major life activities.
Sure.
In this case, breathing, right? Breathing and working would be that major life activity. And it influences that. And so you kind of have to think through it. And I think one of the things that I think this is something that we don't do enough, but is to be proactive and think about, well, what would we do in that kind of scenario? Like, how would we handle it in our workplace? With remote work, you could just say, okay, you're going to have to work remotely. But I'm thinking about your area, Chuck, like down in a resort. That could be a challenge, right? Working in a housekeeper role.
Oh yeah.
what would they do and where would they go, right? And so
Yeah.
kind of thinking about those kind of things.
Well, it's not only that, but every resort now has their smell. Okay. Every resort has a
Oh,
smell. In fact, I was at a buddy of mine's. I was at his house the other day and he had this like bubbler thing going. I said, "What's that?" He says, "Oh, that's Wyndham smell. Wyndham lobby smell." Okay. The resort that I'm at, they have a smell that gets pumped in. I've worked at other resorts where they pump in different smells that are
right.
specifically for that resort. So that could be a problem. The rooms, you're right, the rooms, the chemicals, the smells. So yeah, but I got to tell you, I know a lot of folks, and unfortunately I say this would be like, "Oh, that's a bunch of BS, blah blah blah." They
Yeah.
would be rude, they would be mean, and that actually takes me to my in the news, the SHRM Quarterly. That if you're in HR and you're not a member of SHRM, you should definitely consider it. It is our industry association. But there's a big push with SHRM lately about civility in the workplace, courtesy. And people are like, "What's civility?" Courtesy and politeness. Okay. Courtesy and politeness. And this is a huge article in here, John, but I just want to get some of the highlights here where they talk about, they did a survey of 1,600 workers, okay? And in that, they found, and I guess what they did was they upscaled it. It was 300 million people in America based on 1,600 people. And so I don't know how accurate that is. It was, but they said based on that, of the 300 and, I don't know, 30 million Americans, U.S. workers witness or experience 171 million acts of incivility per day. So the bars kind of could be low. It's politeness and courtesy is how we're defining civility. But they said 40% of those occur in the workplace. And they go on to talk a little bit about why is that, and they say things like, well, it could be isolation from COVID, from the pandemic. People are working more remote, so they don't know how to act in person. Talking about generational things. Younger employees tend to maybe deal with personal issues than maybe older workers, and it makes maybe the younger workers feel uncomfortable. But it's really interesting, and in fact, they asked the group. They said, well, where other than the workplace have you experienced uncivil behavior? And 53% said in the store or while I was shopping.
Wow.
45% said online social media, 37% at a restaurant or bar, on the news, while I was driving as a passenger in a private vehicle, at the park in the town square, in my neighborhood apartment complex, or on public transportation. So, they give some ideas on how to combat that, set some ground rules, actually promote civility. I know we do a lot of classes on inclusion and workplace harassment and things like that. But they said, also include civility, politeness, and courtesy. And, it's a big issue, especially when it comes to incivility can lead to bullying, which can then lead to other things. But I found that to be interesting. As you brought up the perfume thing too.
No, it's really interesting, right? Because when I do an employment law course, I talk about, what are laws for and that kind of stuff. And laws are there to govern that relationship between employer and employee and each other and that kind of stuff. And then it's about that citizenry, right? And so what is it in your organization? How should employees behave and act, right? And that has to be a conversation, right? Because we assume that everyone has the same level of civility that we have. And that's not true.
No.
People have different perspectives, different things. And one thing that somebody could do could be very upsetting to somebody else and not know it at all. I don't know if I've told this story on the air or not, but I was working with, I was working in corporate America, and I was in this company, and I had a friend who felt like she was being bullied. And what was happening was there was a temporary boss above her who was coming in trying to change things and do things, but he was like 6'6", probably 250, 275 pounds. He was a big gentleman. And he would come over and he would lean over her. And he wasn't trying to bully her, but just his presence, she felt like, oh my gosh, you're pushing me down, you're doing that. And so I had to have a conversation with him, like, look, it's not your personality as much as your presence when you walk into the room. You have to understand you're a big guy. And if you lean over somebody, that can be very detrimental to how they're thinking about it. And so you got to think about, how am I being perceived in the workplace? Yeah. And so it was a good conversation. We ended up working it out and ended up being a good working relationship, but you have to be careful about those kind of things.
Yeah. What else you got? And that's true. I see it every day in my workplace, just exactly what you described. So what else you got, John? I got something I can't wait to share, but I want to hear if you got anything else.
So last night, I come back from my vacation, and our producer and Chuck are sending these voice audio text messages.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
And I'm like, oh, stop it. Don't do it. I hate it. But they're both talking about how great you can hear the tone. You can get the information. It sounds better. You don't misinterpret it. And so it got me kind of thinking about, how are we in the workplace using technology to connect to our workers, right? And so one of the things that's happening is the whole TikTok explosion, and the TikTok hashtag work, and how people are doing the quitting and things on air. But can we, and again, I don't have an answer for this, but can we use TikTok-like videos to create connection within our workplace? Right? Can we use those 30-second, 60-second videos for somebody just talk about, oh man, this was great. So-and-so did this great thing for me and I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And have it internally within the thing. And because, again, a lot of people are using that, right? They're using the Facebook, they're using Instagram, they're using TikTok. And so I think it could be, bring that over into your internet, right? So it's not going out into the whole world, but it could be a way to kind of make that connection for, I'll say it, the younger generation.
Yeah. There is a program we use at my place. It's for companies. It's like an internal Facebook thing. It's called Beekeeper. And you can load things up. There's all kinds of things you could do with it. You do schedules, information. You could post, the handbook and things like that. But it's almost, think of it like as an internal Facebook where people can just basically put videos, and it's open to employees. They could take pictures, they could post it up, and I get notifications on my phone. But what I'm going to do is, we're going to put a web-enabled TV in the employee cafeteria that will be able to run the most, like the last 14 days of anything from Beekeeper. And so including videos and pictures and announcements and things like that. So there is technology out there, John. We just have to harness it. And that's a great point.
I think we need to kind of reach out and go and ask, right? How can we better communicate? What can we do? And start using those tools. And I'm glad they're out there to help that. So that's great. So
one of the things that relates to our big story today is there was a survey, a couple of surveys out, and in this article that I read about this survey, the headline was a leadership exodus looms as HR leaders consider leaving their jobs. It's over on the HR Dive. And as I read that article, I found this interesting. Nearly half of HR professionals are new to their job, and have been in their role for 2 years or less, indicating a potential area in need of more support, according to a Paycor. That was a Paycor study. So I thought that was interesting. The overall article basically said, hey, it's a group called the Blue Ivy Group. They did a study. They said 57% of chief HR officers and 75% of people leaders are considering leaving their roles in the next 8 to 12 months. I find that to be, I just cannot, it sounds inflated to me. You know, I don't know, when I talk to HR people, I've not heard anyone say, hey, I'm thinking of quitting. But I've just found that to be a fascinating study. And they said, some of the reasons could be, they say they're burnt out as their top concern, also followed by inadequate C-suite support. But burnout, yeah. So, and the burnout is leading to less effective leadership, lower employee morale, lower retention overall. But I found that interesting that a lot of HR people are just looking to say, hey, I'm done. Maybe they want to be consultants, John. I don't know, live the dream.
Yeah, well, yeah. I know there's a lot of people that are coming into the consultant HR world. I see them coming in some of my groups. I wonder if any of that has to do with that typically. I'm not going to say always, but typically people in the chief people officer role are either Generation X or baby boomers. And we know that baby boomers are retiring at a higher rate than ever before. And we know that Generation X is looking to retire as well. And so I do think there's some of that. And I do think that there's frustration in the HR field because we're dealing with more, again, we're going back to your other conversation about the civility. I think we're dealing with more of that. And as individuals, we take it personally and we're trying to figure out, like, how do we do this? How do we make these workplaces great? And so there's probably some of that frustration as well. Like, I can't deal with this, right? And so again, HR isn't a department, right?
Yeah.
And how employees work and the culture has to be on everyone in the corporation. And if the executives aren't supporting it, it's not gonna go anywhere. And so that really is important that we make sure that we're supporting it and doing it and handling it on there.
Yeah. Again, folks, listeners, if you are in that 46% of HR that you've been in the role for less than 2 years and you need more support, we have an answer for you. And we're going to go over that answer here. Ready, John?
All right. So this is the big story this week. We've been talking about this, I think, for probably a month and a half, maybe 6 weeks. But the Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition is now available. It's now available. We've launched it earlier this month. We've launched it, and we're very excited about this. Chuck and I have been working on this for a long time to make sure that we're getting it right. And we want to make sure. It's funny, Chuck, because we go back to that article you were talking about where many HR managers and many HR professionals have only been doing their job for 2 years. And I want to go back for you. And here's my question for you. Go back when you started, right? When you started this role, when you started getting into HR and employee management, go back to those first 2 years when you were 2 years into this.
Yeah.
How well informed were you, do you think?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it wasn't, that was back before internet and such. And so it was tough. Go to the library. Maybe I could find a book on HR. They didn't really exist. There were a couple of places maybe that I could get a newsletter or leaflet. And even back then, I was new to my role, so only the top people had SHRM memberships, right?
Wow.
So, and they didn't really share a lot, and they went on the SHRM conferences. So usually your entry level, your newer people, so there really wasn't a lot out there. And so we basically had to figure it out as we went along. Now, of course, our senior leaders would tell us, hey, here's what we need to do. And hey, did you know this is the law? But I didn't have any resources out there to go to. anything that was affordable anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, and I think about, and I tell this story. So this was more, I was a manager, right? It was more employee management for me and kind of the way I got into it. But I remember I had an employee come to me and tell me that they needed time off to take care of their sick mom. And I'm like, well, all right, let me see if I can look at my schedule. Let me see how much time you have and all that kind of stuff. And I basically ended up under the conclusion, like, I can't make this happen. There's no way. I think it was like 3 weeks he needed off. I'm like, there's no way I can give you 3 weeks off. Just, it's not possible with the schedule and stuff. And so I tell him this, and about, a couple hours later, I get this phone call from my boss saying to me, well, John, can you come down to my office? So I come down, the lawyer's there, and they tell me, like, John, under FMLA, we have to give this employee time off. And it was one of those things where it was really my eye-opening, like, I need to pay attention to these employment laws, right? I need to know what is happening. I need to know. And I really started spending a lot of time with the HR department and asking tons of questions and trying to figure things out and get that guidance and really creating processes that would work for me as a manager so I could get the HR side of my role right? I wanted to get those things right. And then after about a year, they're like, John, why don't you come into HR? You got this. You're doing it anyway. And so that's kind of my origin story in getting into HR, kind of building into that and going, oh, all right, now I kind of get this and do it. But I think you're right. I think a lot of times individuals that are starting out don't get that guidance. And worse yet, and I think this is for any time we're starting something new, we don't know what questions to ask, right? And so getting that guidance, I think, can be really important, and creating those systems can be really important.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of times you start off as, hey, you're really good with people. Can you be our HR person? Or I started in recruiting, did some training, and all of a sudden, a couple years later, they're like, hey, you're really good. You should be an HR manager or HR rep, generalist. And I got dumped into it, and I didn't know a lot of this stuff. So, good points.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I think it's all part of that growing and going, and where do I go and how do I handle, we know, or we have these people in our workshops and they're like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what questions to ask. That's why I'm here. Tell me the questions to ask, and I can then go and get those answers. And so I think you and I kind of got together over that. How do we help our clients? How do we help HR professionals and practitioners get HR right? Right. And so kind of looking at that, and then that kind of led us to the guide, right? Creating a guide. So there's something to reach out to. And so it gives you that guidance to get you on your way, and then gives you the deeper resources that really dive into that material and get that material.
Yeah. And with that statistic from Paycor survey, 46% of HR professionals that have been in their role for 2 years or less, this is definitely something that's needed. So for those that don't know, John and I have been teaching HR classes. I've been HR director, HR manager. I've moved up in the role. Then I left for a couple years and became a consultant and taught classes. And like John said, he and I taught a lot of classes. A lot of people were confused about HR. They were new to their role, or they were experienced in their role. But, you can't remember everything, John, can you? You cannot remember everything. So having a resource and was one thing that was always helpful. And so I used to keep checklists around ever since I became that HR manager, HR director, just to try and remember, okay, what's our process? How do we do this? Work with my recruiter, work with my HR manager, work with my HR coordinator who was greeting people as they came into the HR lobby back in the day. And they'd have a bunch of questions. I'd say, okay, what's the question? Okay, here are the checklist things that you need to ask them so we fully understand. So we don't end up in the room with the lawyers and say, oh, I didn't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's so good. It's so good. Right. And I always through my career, and I've had many different careers, I've done many different things, but I always found having those systems in place makes our job easier. And it makes the people's around us job easier as well, right? And so if their job is better, they're doing a better job, then our job becomes easier as well. And so having those systems in there. So Chuck, how do you describe this book to your family members? Like, how do you describe this guide to your family members?
So first of all, I don't even know if we even laid out this, folks. This is the ultimate guide to HR. That's the name of our book. We've spent several years writing it. We had our first version of it a couple years ago. It was very successful. We've gone back and we've updated it. It's the ultimate guide to HR checklist edition. How I describe it, John, there's so many ways to describe this book. But the first thing I tell people is I've taken everything that I know in HR that I've done, and I've boiled it down to checklists. Okay. There's not long, drawn out words, explanations. It's checklists. So the first thing that comes to mind is immediate answers to a variety of HR situations based on our real experiences, John, and our collective experiences. So those immediate answers, no need to sift through dense reference books, endless YouTube videos, which you don't even know if you're going to get anything really reliable. Who are those people? And of course, unreliable web content. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I explain to people. What do you do?
Yeah, well, to me, and I've talked about this probably a bunch on the podcast, but it's about we're best when we're consistently making the right behavioral decisions. Checklist create that consistency, right? So if there's something that I can go back to and go, okay, yep, did that. Okay, and then here's the thing that I think is challenging for a lot of us. You were talking about being a recruiter, right? When you're a recruiter and that's all you're doing, that's all you're focused on, you get really good at that. Probably after a while, you don't need checklists. But for most of us, we're managing many different parts of the HR role, and we may not deal with hiring people very often, doing an investigation very often, doing performance management very often, right? And so we need something to go back to. We need that reference to set us up going, okay, this is what I need to do. Oh, yeah, this is okay. I got the checklist. I can go through. Yep, that's the step. Yep, I got that. Oh, I remember. Oh, yeah, and this is where I need to do this and this. And it just allows us that relief and not having the stress to kind of imagine this every time or rewrite it every time it comes up. And it happens, right? That rewriting comes up a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got one more thing that I use to describe the ultimate guide to HR checklist edition. This book that we've written, this guide, is that it's an indispensable resource for a wide range of users, from students. If you're a college student and you're taking HR classes, this thing is like the cheat sheet. Okay. It's the Cliff Notes. So from students to HR professionals of varying degrees, and small business owners, there's 80 actionable checklists that make navigating HR tasks simple, effective. They ensure that compliance, or as you say, the consistency that comes with that. They go hand in hand, efficiency, and bottom line, they support your decisions in decision making pretty much in any HR role, whether you're an HR person or like you were in your career, John, you were a manager, but you had an HR role to do.
Yeah. And I'm always thinking about, like, when I visualize the person using this book, yeah, I know HR professionals are going to use it, and I know business owners and that kind of stuff. But for me, it's that HR practitioner, right? That person's been volun-told, like, okay, you're doing HR now. Where do I go? What do I do? This is going to set you on the right path, right? This will set you on the right path to have that information and go, okay, now I have it. And then we put legal concerns in there. We put resources. So it's not just the checklist. You have resources to back up the information we put in there So you can then like, oh, I want to know more about this, right? And that's how we learn. This gives you the kind of the outline, the process to start, but then you may want to be like, I want to know more about this, and where does this come from, and how do I do this? And so you build on your knowledge as you go on. And then hopefully, right? Hopefully then you're sharing that information with other people, right? That's the goal of this, is to do this.
John, let's talk about some of the checklists that we have, some of the common HR situations briefly,
Sure.
and share it with the listeners.
Yeah, and so the one that I want to start with, and I think this is something that all of us get challenged on if we're not doing it regularly, and that's the interview process, right? How do I do the interview process? I should call it the hiring process, right? Because the hiring process is not just doing interviews, right? We need to think about, what does the job posting look like? How do we review applications and resumes? What questions should we have in the interview? What questions should we ask during the interview? What kind of background checks? How do we do legal background checks? What do we need to do during the interview to make sure those background checks are being done? How do we do drug tests? How do we offer the job, right? And then how do we have that person start in that orientation? So one of my favorite checklists from this book is we put in there 2 checklists. One is, here's the 30 top questions that you should avoid asking in an interview. And then we put in there, here's the top 30 questions that we recommend that you ask. And so both of those lists are wonderful. Not only are they wonderful for HR practitioners, but they're wonderful for hiring managers and anybody else is being involved in the hiring process. Because here's what happens, Chuck. As an HR professional, our work is contingent, a lot of the times of getting our work right is contingent on what supervisors, managers, and employees do.
Yeah.
And if they're not getting it right, and so in the interview process, we may have a peer interview, or we may have a direct report interview. And if they don't know what questions to ask, or they're asking questions that we should avoid, it could put us in legal hot water. And so I'm always making sure that I'm sending out to my hiring managers, or anybody going to be involved in the interview, here's the questions you should avoid. If you have any questions why you should avoid them, come see me, right? And so having those, I think, is a great step. And so that my first think of when I think of the ultimate guide to HR is that interview process and making sure the hiring process that we're getting that right.
Yeah.
What about you?
Investigations, John. I do a lot of investigations and done so many that I poured almost everything I could think of into our investigations checklist. I mean, imagine this. An employee steps into your office, they're visibly upset, confides that they've been experiencing some sort of harassment, bullying, incivility at work, and it's a crucial moment. What do you do? And the way you respond, the steps you take next are vital for resolving the situation, but also for protecting your organization from legal risks and maintaining that safe and respectful workplace. So I created, and with your input too, by the way, this isn't just like I did this, you did that.
Yeah,
you and I went back and forth on this, but a well-structured checklist when it comes to investigations is absolutely crucial. And we have a series of checklists in there that deal with how to respond to this, but there is one specific checklist that ensures every part of the process is thorough. And I'll just highlight some of the checklist items in it. So if you're listening, even if you want to write these things down, because in an investigation, here are the top line items. Number 1, you're going to receive the complaint. And so you need to have some sort of way to receive the complaint. You're going to review your policy, ensure you fully understand your anti-harassment policy. Number 3, you've got to take immediate action, start your investigation promptly. You're going to interview witnesses. That's all witnesses, the complainant and the alleged harasser. You got to document your findings. You got to analyze your findings. And then finally, you've got to take action, implement those necessary actions and document everything appropriately. And finally, and sometimes people forget this part, John, you've got to communicate the results, inform all the relevant parties of the outcome. But there's so much more in that, in the checklist, but that in itself is absolutely valuable for anyone that's listening right now. Because if you do this and you review your policies and take all of these steps, it's going to help you navigate that investigation process. It really needs to be, you need to have a meticulous process, make sure nothing is overlooked, and it's conducted legally and ethically. So with this guide in hand, you're basically equipped. We've put a lot of thought into this on how to handle harassment complaints and foster that workplace where employees feel safe and supported. So that's one of my favorite checklists.
Yeah, and I think, because I think one of the things that, and this is what I was talking about earlier, it's not like we're doing investigations every day, right? There are people that do it, right? I get it, right? In big organizations, there are people, that's their role, right? They're just doing the HR investigations. But for most of us, this happens maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. And it's easy, again, we learn by doing, right? We get that experience, we're learning by doing, but 6 months go by and all of a sudden we have another situation. What I love about that checklist, Chuck, is that you can go back to it and go, all right, let me walk through it again. I got it. Boom. All right, these are the things. And then that information, that flow comes back to you, and then you have it, right? And so that way, that's where I love the ultimate guide to HR, is because it's something that you can turn to, go back to, and kind of see what you need to do.
Yeah. And when we talk about that statistic that I shared from just last month, literally 46% of HR professionals are new to their job, 2 years or less. But whether you're new to your job or you are just taking over an HR department, and in my career, I have tended to be the fix-it HR guy. I did it. Yeah. I did it as a HR manager, HR director. I'd go in and all of a sudden I'm the new HR person. Also as a consultant, I spent some time traveling the country on what they call task force HR, where I'd be dropped into a hotel, helicoptered in, John, helicoptered in, and I have to figure it out. Sometimes the HR director's not there. Maybe they're there, but they're not very helpful. They're checked out. So I want to jump to another scenario and another checklist. And this is new for this version, is the new to HR checklist, taking over an HR department. So imagine this. Again, you've stepped into a new role as an HR director. You realize that the previous leadership left things, well, maybe a bit of a mess. So the pressure is on. The pressure is on you to get HR right and to get everything in order fast. So you need a game plan, something that's going to help you and make sure that every base is covered, every compliance issue is addressed. You may be a one-person HR department, you may have several people working for you, but we have this checklist in the book called the Getting HR Right Checklist, and it's not just a list to like tick things off, but it is a roadmap. And I'm so excited about it because I've used this. I've used it mentally, and now it's down physically. It gives you a chance to rapidly assess and enhance the HR function within the organization. Even if you've been there for a couple of years, this is a great checklist to pull out and say, okay, where are we? Do we need to do like a checkup? Go into the doctor. Yeah. Let's do a quick checkup. And it's designed to help you identify and address the most critical areas, from legal compliance to effective employee management and that overall health of the organization. So can I go over just the top 6 items in the checklist? There's so many more things underneath it, John, but the top 6 things when you go into an HR department, you want to look at, number 1, a compliance audit. And that's where the checklist starts with what I consider those foundational pillars of any HR department, that compliance and legal protection. The next thing is one thing that's near and dear to both our hearts, love them or hate them, folks, the handbook, that handbook review. right? And as you have said many times, it's more than just a document. It's the backbone of the company's policies to make sure you're legal, compliant, and it should be accessible to all team members and employees. Number 3 is a wage and hour compliance. Look at your job classifications, your pay equity, your benefits. Do all that for legal alignment. Who's salaried exempt? Who's non-exempt? Are you following the law? The 4th thing is safety and risk management. You want to verify your OSHA compliance and workplace safety. You want to take a look at your EEO policies. That's number 5. Confirm your posters are up, your policies are in place, your employees and your managers are trained. And finally, one of the things that I really find valuable is manager meetings, small group meetings, large group meetings, but you need to make sure, and you said it earlier, it's how our managers are functioning out there. Because HR is not just a department. HR is a function too. And you want to make sure you engage with your managers to assess the HR functions, any areas for improvement, and make sure they're doing things right also. So this, for any new HR director, this Getting HR Right checklist is a lifeline. It's a guide to making sure that the organization is not only legally protected, but you can really build a strong HR function that supports not only the business, but also the people. So that is a checklist that is near and dear to my heart. It is organically driven. It is based on years of my experience of going in and taking over HR departments.
Yeah, which is great. And it definitely, I know this year we talked a lot about how do we give information to help those individuals that are been volun-told. Hey, you're now taking over the HR function.
Yeah.
What do I do? And I will tell you, in a lot of my classes, those are the people that show up. They're like, well, John, guess what? I just was told 2 weeks ago that I was going to be taking over HR. I don't have a degree in it. I don't have, I don't have the background in it. One of my classes that I teach, it's very interesting. I get a lot of people that were doing accounting, and then they were doing payroll, and then they were doing benefits, and now they're like, well, why don't you just take over the HR role? And they're like, that's not what I wanted to do, but all right, that's what you want me to do, and I'm going to do it. And so having guidance allows us to make those better decisions, right? And so I love that you've created, or actually we created together, these new,
Yes.
like, what do I do when I'm coming into HR? We have like the vision statement to help you kind of classify what the vision is for the organization, how to build some of that cultural stuff's in there as well. The one that I was thinking about, Chuck, was when you were talking is performance management, right? And so because that's a question we get a lot, like, how do I improve our employees' performance? What do I need to do and how do I do it and what that kind of stuff? And we talk about a lot of different things because sometimes it's not, we assume that the employee knows everything they need to know, right? And they don't, right? And so we have to give them knowledge, or sometimes we need to teach them a new skill. Sometimes we just need to give them guidance, but it's more than that, right? And so sometimes we have to do that performance improvement plan. And in the ultimate guide to HR checklist, we created performance improvement plans that are already in there, right? So you can tap into that and go, okay, this is what's not working. Here's what you need to do. And we really guide you through that process to help your employees get better. And that's one of our roles. Chuck kind of talked about it. It was like, we want to help, of course, keep the company compliant, do all that kind of stuff, but we need an engaged workforce. And part of that is working on their performance and getting them excited and getting them engaged, and making sure that we do that the right way. So this definitely has, as Chuck said earlier, I think over 80 different, I think actually over 85 different checklists that you can use to make sure that you're getting HR right in your organization. And it doesn't matter the size of your organization. It doesn't matter the industry. All of that is captured in there, right? And so you can kind of go through and go, oh, I can do this checklist, and I can use this checklist here. And the one thing that we did that actually Chuck did, he took the time to do it, was we have in the back in the appendix, every single state and their Department of Labor or their industrial or their workforce thing. So you can go to them and ask them, hey, what do I need to do about this state, right? So there's a lot of information about those as well. So definitely something to tap into as part of this.
John, I know you got another favorite checklist. Want to share one more, and then we'll kind of let folks, tell them how to get the book with a special code, by the way. It's going to save you a lot of money.
So the one that I use a lot, and then I actually wrote a book on it, and this is actually from my book, the Stay Interview Checklist, right? And so one of the things that I would ask all of you to do, if you're in HR, ask the individuals that stay with your organization for a long time, why do they stay? And so this Stay Interview Checklist gives you the questions, right? What questions should I be asking? We break it down by the different sections, but it really rounds up and gives you the questions to ask so you can better understand why these people are staying, because you want to find individuals that want to stay in your organization. We know turnover costs a lot of money. And so figuring out what you're doing now and what you can do to help these people stay is critical. And so doing those stay interviews, I think, is more important than doing the exit interview questions, because you want the people to stay. And so figuring that out. So again, I think that's my other one in there as well. We do have the book on our website, Stay Interviews. So if you want to just kind of dive into that, you can do that as well.
Yeah, folks, if you're interested, not only we're going to give you a code to save money, but if you go to ultimateguidetohr.com, Ultimate Guide to HR, you can click on a link that says buy now. You can actually see screenshots of the book. You can see the table of contents. We're going to have the link in our bio below. But the code, the book normally goes for $69, but we have a code for you. It's HRS Launch. That's HR Stories, right? HR Stories. So HRS Launch, you put that in, that will save you $30. So you can get this book. It is a downloadable PDF. At this point, it's a download PDF. It is interactive, and you can get it for $39 instantly, by the way.
It's funny, Chuck, because we talk about, and I talk to business people all the time, and when you update your services and you get them better, typically you charge them more money. That's not what we did. We wanted to make sure that this book was accessible to as many people as possible. So we took off $100 off the price. We made it $69. And what we're doing today is using that code HRS Launch, one word. You can get an additional $30 off. So you can get it for $39, right? And so that is worth the effort. And it's definitely worth getting the book. I promise that you will use it probably on a regular basis. You will probably use it. And then there's going to be times for some of you, you're not going to use it on a regular basis, but you're going to use it when you have those major HR events, whether that's an investigation, an employee that's performing bad, or you start a new job and you want to look at the HR, right? And so you'll come back to this time and time again. Chuck and I talk about this often, is that in our work, me as an HR consultant and Chuck as an HR director for a large resort, we turn to it all the time. We turn to it all the time and go, hey, I need to get this, and I need to do this, because we don't remember everything. We don't remember every single step that we put in this book. We remember a lot of it because we wrote it, but we don't remember everything. And so we want that refresher. We want to come back and do that. And so having that there, I think, can be really beneficial. Keep it up on your desk. Keep it on your desktop. Make sure you have it. It's a ebook, right? And so it's an e-guide. It's interactive. Definitely something that you can use every day in your workplace.
Yeah, John, I just want to go over some of the key, just real briefly, the key chapters with several checklists under them. So how to be successful in HR is the first chapter. Human resource foundational documents is the second chapter with probably about 12 checklists under there. Hiring employees, the talent acquisition checklist, the new employee paperwork checklist, the offer letter checklist. It's all under there. Hiring independent contractors, rewarding employees, your pay, your benefits, creating the best work environment. That's our biggest chapter with the most checklists in there. Managing remote employees is another chapter. Improving employee performance, one that you've put a lot of time and effort into. John, what happens if OSHA shows up tomorrow on your work site, or your boss comes to you and says, hey, we're taking over another company. I need you to put together a merger acquisition. Yeah, what do I do? You don't have to panic. You know what? It's in the book. We've got a whole chapter on keeping your organization safe and how do you respond to crisis and OSHA and hazards. Then there's reducing your organizational risk, doing some self-audits on I-9s and W-2 prep, legal pitfalls with the I-9, FMLA, and then, of course, state resources. And it's just a fantastic, no one has been unsatisfied, and we've sold many of these in the first round, and this is even more improved. So very excited, folks. You want to go to ultimateguidetohr.com, ultimateguidetohr.com. Read through the website, click on buy now, read through some of the screenshots, the glossary, see what's all included, and use the code HRS launch, LAUNCH, to save $30. Yeah. So that's it, John. Anything to wrap up for our good listeners today? We've bent their ear.
I wanted to thank them for listening to us. I know we didn't do our normal story today, but I think it was beneficial just listening to Chuck, especially, talk about the different checklists you need and the different information and having all that stuff. So thank you for listening. Definitely subscribe, like, tell your friends about our podcast. Next week, we will have I think we're going to do a question and answer edition next week. And so we'll be answering your questions. So if you have any questions, there's a send a text message right in the section in the notes. So go ahead and just send us a text message. We do get those and do try to respond as fast as possible. And let us know what questions you have around HR or employee management as a whole. And we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. And you want to get the Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, where there are many answers. ultimateguidetohr.com. Thanks for listening, folks.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.